Welcome to this panel discussion. I have to say, overjoyed to be able to include a number of people whose work is, I think, at the top end of their fields. I think they are all people who are doing really interesting work and, what is most important, interesting research into what works and what doesn't work and how organizations can, should, maybe, and could adapt the way that they respond to a whole series of changes which are going on. I really love the phrase that Ksenia used today, which was this idea of compressed transformation. That idea of rapid change quite quickly. So, first of all, I'm going to introduce you from the far end, Nigel Paine, author, LNTV host, academic, formerly head of learning at the BBC, genuinely all-round nice bloke who does a fantastic podcast with Martin Cousins, which I highly recommend. Next to him is Egle Vinauskaite. See, I've been learning Egle Vinauskaite, who is, as part of Nodes, a consultancy and strategist working with organizations about learning and AI, but has also collaborated with Donald Taylor, who many of you may be familiar with, and created some really interesting research. AI and L&D, Intention and Reality. You can get it online for free. Have a look at it. It is magnificent, really, really interesting in terms of what's really happening. Ksenia Zheltoukhova, most of you will have met this morning, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing her again, but clearly somebody who knows data and learner analytics like the back of her hand. And on this end, a great friend of the World of Learning Conference and the World of Learning Summit, Andy Lancaster, former head of learning at CIPD, best-selling, award-winning author and all of those things. And again, generally nice man with a very interesting collection of both shirts and Doc Martens, which I think it moves up in my estimation instantly as a result of that. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to throw a question to the team. I'm going to ask the panel to respond to that individually, at which point I am hoping to have a rest, which means that the questions may need to come from you. If they don't, I'll, extemporize and do all of that stuff, but, think hard, come up with some questions, that will be really helpful. So, I'm going to start, if I may. Egle, can I start with you on this question? So this is the first question I'm going to ask, which is really, what are the innovations that are going on within the workplace? And most importantly, I guess, how is that impacting L&D and L&D practice?
Yeah, at this point I kind of want to be edgy and say something like metaverse, but it is AI. And I think instead of talking in general terms about why AI is changing the workplace, I would like to make a case for it. Because previously, when we would have an innovation, we would think about it as a thing that helps us do a thing. It helps us to collaborate with other people with some video communications better. It helps us to collaborate and share documents. It helps us collect data, analyze data. So some innovation is a piece of technology that helps us do a thing. The thing with AI is that it's not necessarily a piece of technology. It's much like electricity. It underpins what we could call innovations, because it's about what you do with it and how you use it that actually innovates our practice. And it does, my case for how it innovates the workplace is that it affects us on pretty much any dimension that matters in the workplace. It affects the nature of our work. This is something that everyone talks about a lot, how the tasks that we do change, but I don't think that we all appreciate how much they might change or how they might change the nature of the work. For example, I'm not saying that this is going to happen, but some roles in L&D might become much less connected with people and much more data-driven. Is that still the kind of job that you would feel compelled to do? It also affects the pace of our work, and if there's something that we've learned from the innovations that came before, is that no matter what kind of efficiencies we win back using technology, we end up using them to push ourselves harder for further efficiencies instead of taking the time to do something about the amount of work that we do and win it actually back. There's also the social contract between the employer and the employee that stems from it. And with it, the idea of how we organize our work in a world where one person might be able to do the work, the output of something that right now takes a team. And ultimately, how that affects our work identity, because a lot of us take a lot of pride in our work. For example, you might know that when in organizations you have the transition, for example, from an IC, individual contributor, to a manager, it's not just about skills, it's about how you see yourself. I used to take pride in doing things, and now I'm managing other people. So where does that come from? So imagine that, like a flavor of that at scale, and how that's going to affect our work identities. And finally, how does that affect the hierarchy in a world where we relate differently to expertise and knowledge? Because so far, it's been largely related to our tenure, our knowledge, our experience in our jobs. So to summarize, we have AI changing us as individual working people. We have AI changing jobs and the ways of working, and AI changing the way that organizations might organize themselves. So pretty much the key components of the workplace. And that means that, well, in my view, it affects L&D in at least two ways. The first one, it obviously changes what we do, AI and L&D, how we use this technology to change the nature and perhaps the purpose of our work. And the other part of it is we are, frankly, very well positioned to help organizations on this path to change. And it's about how we step up and what do we do and how do we make our mark at this, I would say, once in a decade moment.
A once in a decade moment, Nigel. What's your take on that sense of the impact on organisations, teams, the way teams interrelate, the way organisations interrelate with their people?
Well, you know, they say that people grow to look like their dogs. And if you go to the park, it's absolutely true. How can that dog and that person not be dog and owner, or even owner and dog? And in some ways, organisations make people in their own image. And we've had this organisational structure for the last 40 years, probably even more than that, but certainly the IT-infused infrastructure for 40 years. And it turns people into something, definitely into something. Whether that's, whatever that is, mirror your neurons, just the focus on certain behaviours, certain ways of doing things, it changes people. And I think that is about to be smashed to pieces. I just cannot conceive that the sort of changes, not only in the internal environment with AI coming in, but particularly in the external environment, the sort of pressure on organisations at the moment. That new acronym, we're no longer VUCA world, we're a Brinner world over there, brittle, unknown, uncertain, confused, all of that stuff. If we're going to respond to that, people need to change. So I think we're going to actually reconstruct organisations over the next 5 or 10 years. They will look nothing like they look now. On all those big, solid structures with their hierarchy and their lifts and their top floors and corner offices will go in favour of a much more homogenous, network-based organisation where what matters is collective experience and collective understanding, not you are an expert, therefore you're 2 grades above me, I will never question you because you're 2 grades above me, and I won't listen to you because you're 1 grade below me. I think all of that has to go because you can't manage a confused, brittle, uncertain environment relying on 4 people at the top to make all the decisions. It's just not possible. And if you add skills and all of that, skills destroy jobs. We don't need jobs, we need roles that emerge and morph and evolve quickly. You can't do that when you've got, oh, it's not on my job description. Oh, I need to go to this committee to get my job description modified. It's a load of old rubbish. So I think everything will start to change rapidly in order to overcome those pressures which everybody feels under, real pressures.
Andy, that level of innovation is on one level massively exciting, on another level cataclysmic. Pick your spot somewhere on that continuum.
Exactly.
What does innovation in the workplace and its impact on L&D look like from your perspective?
Yeah, I think we often confuse innovation and technology. Technology is an aspect of innovation. So today we sit here in different contexts. We all have the potential to innovate in what we're doing. And I think it's really important that this doesn't become something which is so far out there that it disempowers us to be able to innovate in our setting. So for me, I was in prison for 5 years. I didn't do anything bad. I was head of HR and learning for one of the big rehab charities working with heroin addicts. In a secure prison environment, you are not going to get technology anywhere near the building, unless you've got a drone. Some of you might have seen that on the news. So I think I'd like to present, Robin, that I think innovation is about us doing things creatively and better in the context which we are in. And Ksenia and I, we both worked at CIPD. We used to use 3 lenses, which I think are really, really helpful, and you've mentioned already. So it's work, workforce and workplace. So those 3 are brilliant lenses. So those are things I think for each of us, we can look at our own context, how we do that. The one I'd just like to throw in is synchronicity versus asynchronicity. I think that's a really interesting. We've come out of COVID. Some have had the potential to have hybrid working, home working. If you worked in healthcare, again, I worked in healthcare for many years, you don't have those opportunities. But I think learning is now being shaped by us being good at being able to connect people together. This is great, isn't it, that we've joined together here, but asynchronous, in an asynchronous way. And I think in learning, we're tripping over that a bit right now. So we'll probably maybe come on to communities in a minute. So I just want to empower us that this is not just about technology, this is about doing things creatively in our context to make a real difference. And every single one of us can do that, which I think is exciting.
So Ksenia, you talked a lot about data already today, but I think that asynchronous-synchronous thing puts an interesting spin on that, because of course naturally we collect data to be crunched by AI from digital sources which are focused primarily but not exclusively towards asynchronous content consumption, learning activities, etc. If we measure past that data, use that data, do we perhaps get a result which we could have predicted, because it's all about that bit rather than the synchronicity of physical contact that Andy's just mentioned?
Yeah, I think I was fascinated by how you were describing. So I was remembering the 3 dimensions, and I felt you almost added a 4th one, time. This was very meta for me in my mind. But what I was reflecting on as you were asking that question is that the reason we struggle with organizational practice insights and analytics is because we are getting much better at capturing the data on processes, on the work, how work happens, on skills, what are the skills that people have, maybe on behaviors, but we're not so good at both collecting and understanding the data on the sentiment or how people actually feel and how it changes over time. Multiple conversations. Let's do pulse checks, let's do survey, let's measure sentiment. It's just never real time enough to understand what's happening. I think the second part of it for me is that what I see and when I talked in the morning about how work changes is that the work has become so much more a collective process. So we always worked in groups. We always come, we share an office. That's not the same as being engaged in a collective process at work. And one analysis of job descriptions across the world, globally, has looked at what skills have declined in prevalence and which ones are on the rise. So if you just look at job descriptions and what companies are looking for, what's on the rise. And one of such skills is collaboration and connected work. So work is just generally a more collective, collaborative process, and I'm not sure that we always reimagine learning as that collective intelligence phenomenon as opposed to training people on individual skills. The reason I think that's an area and that's a challenge is because increasingly I see organizations, when I do my work, businesses usually come to me with a challenge. They say, oh, help us solve this. And I've noticed that recently I hear a lot of culture frameworks that start with one, and then the name of the company. We want to become one Accenture. We want to become one, insert the name of your company. And for me, it's a symptom. I was like, why are you so interested in that? It must be a problem. It must be because you're losing people. They're becoming disconnected. They're all over the spot. They don't want to come to the office. They don't want to work together. So I treat it as an early flag of how the new model of an organization needs to emerge to counteract this cultural challenge. Companies are really, really trying to connect people, and people are having other choices. They have other options now.
Nigel, I'm going to bring you in on that because I saw you nodding vehemently.
Oh, well.
I think that issue, I've seen, I cannot tell you how many projects that I have worked on over the last 2 years which have started with the word one. And for the most part, I would argue that they are branding and nothing else. Nigel, discuss.
I spent a good few years of my life working on one BBC. And why were we worried about one BBC? Because there was no one BBC. It was full of... We did a cultural analysis of the place, and what we discovered was that the BBC was a series of independent, warring islands. And some had high status, some had low status. The lowest status island in the whole of the BBC was HR, just to let you know. And what it meant was that the high status islands were always repelling borders, and the low status islands were always trying to escape to get to a higher status island. So to try to bring out of that a coherent one BBC, we are one BBC, great things happen when we work together was the value. Great things happen, and we proved it conclusively that when the organisation shares its expertise, great things happen. And that just, it went. Greg Dyke left, in came Mark Thompson, who couldn't have cared less about one BBC or anything apart from bits of the BBC doing well. All that energy evaporated. So it's true exactly what you're saying, that it's often an indicator of something really hollow at the heart of an organisation, and that many organisations don't have that solidity. They are made up of bits and pieces. I've been working with a software organisation which has been massively acquisitive over the last 5 years. And the idea that they are one organisation is nonsense. They are just a reflection of every single company they bought. And to say by memo, now you're part of this and these are our values, see you on Tuesday, doesn't work. These are really difficult issues. So
apart from changing the syntax of your emails and the logo that goes on them, Andy, what have you seen work, not work? Whereas Nigel talks a lot about the organisation as the entity, I know you talk a lot about the community as an entity. So where does the one message and all of that work down into the community and actually affect meaningful change?
Yeah, so I think when I did the research for the book on organisational learning communities, it was really interesting to me that the collective works in nature. It just happens. Bees, ants, killer whales, hermit crabs. This is how it's done, that we work together without even thinking about it. So for me, to Nigel's point, I think there is a real skill and opportunity for us as learning professionals to think, how do we gather people to create those fantastic connections where the magic happens? And I think what I found, Robin, is that it's very patchy and they're very fragile ecosystems where the relation, and in a sense that's what you've just said, Nigel. One CEO comes in and can blast this out of the water. So I think I would assert that we as learning professionals have a real opportunity to be the custodians and encouragers of community. We don't run them, but we support them, we help them to find purpose. And I think that's probably the thing which came out from my research, that where communities work really well, people naturally gather around a cause, a purpose. Wenger calls it a domain or whatever. So if, as learning professionals, we sit here today, I would go into the organisation and look at where those pockets of natural connection are, and we dial those up and we resource them and we encourage them. And I think that's a very different thing. I never used to be involved with communities in my previous L&D roles. Now I would start an organisation by saying, how do we connect people? So I think it's around cause, I think it's around those natural connections. And what I found is if you look anywhere, be it a sports community, a faith community, there are attributes which we can almost reverse engineer, and I think that's a great opportunity for us as learning professionals to think, how do we do that? So it's not a trend or a fad, rather, this is something really important. I think we're probably all coming out on the same thing here, aren't we, which is really scary. That collectiveness is something we as L&D professionals can really get behind.
And again, in terms of how that then, in the research that you've done, the report that you've done, the case studies that you created, how does that collectiveness feature within the people who have got a handle on how AI is going to help or how AI is going to enable people to do great things? Or is that an occasional thing that happens almost by accident? Where does that sit?
Okay, again, there are two aspects to the answer to that question, because one thing that has come out really strongly in Ksenia session, in Aki session, and pretty much anyone who talks about AI adoption is that it's not a process of top down, here are the tools, here's some learning, and do it. It is very much about, okay, so we're going to give you some foundational knowledge, but then it is about learning from each other. It's about creating these moments of connection between people, between departments, to share these experiments, to surface what's happening in a company, to build on it and create almost like the playbook that is particular to that organizational context. So that's on the AI adoption side. Now on the AI and L&D side, the maybe not community, but there is a flavor of this one organization type of ethos. Because one thing that we noticed, Don and I, we did this survey of over 400 people, spoke with a bunch of organizations, a bunch of professionals, trying to understand how AI is being used in L&D in reality. And the majority of AI use cases are clustered around, let's use AI to analyze documents, write emails, create some content, create quiz questions, that sort of thing. So that's the absolute majority of use cases. And then there's a small, a handful of organizations, maybe 20% of organizations that are doing some really advanced work, very strategic, very much about, okay, how can AI help us move faster? How can it accelerate our work, both at the organizational level, but as L&D as well. And we try to understand what is the difference there, because I think 2 years ago or even a year ago we thought that, okay, so AI, generative AI specifically, just happened to us, so if we use it long enough, we are going to start moving, we're going to become comfortable, and we're going to start moving towards these more advanced use cases of AI that actually add a lot more value beyond efficiencies and time savings. And what we noticed is that it is not a function of using generative AI enough. It is a function of, first of all, the ethos within L&D and how L&D sees its purpose, but it's also about how L&D collaborates with the rest of the business. Very because good. If you go beyond just using your own ChatGPT or whatever account, and if you want to use it for personalization, data analysis, skill development, sort of creating this skill bots, performance supports, skills intelligence, all of that, L&D cannot do it from within. It needs to have the skills, technology, and or relationships from the rest of the organization. So again, it cannot be insulated. We have long talked about how it is not enough to produce content, to produce training. It is important to upskill people, but we cannot keep doing that. And we are now, I think, at a bit of a crossroads where with AI, generative AI specifically, has made the value of content everywhere, not just in learning, but the value of content plummet. And so will the value of L&D if it focuses and ties itself to content. And it is about becoming part of the wider business.
Exactly.
One enterprise.
I'm going to throw a question out to the audience now, just because, well said. Time you did some work. Show of hands, please. How many of you have used any form of AI to create some content which you have used with learners? Or just create some content generally, but create some content. So I would say that probably represents what, about 40%, 50% of this audience, maybe more? Yeah, more. Yeah. Higher. I'm not playing the cards is right, Nigel. So that is okay. I had a conversation with Philippa Hardman, who Piers name-checked earlier in his presentation upstairs, and she said, of course that's what people are going to do first, but then encourage them to stop and move on to doing something else. Use that as a playground, a sandpit, a place to try things out, and then get them to think more widely about what this thing can do and whether content is needed at all, which is another opportunity. But I think that, Ksenia, that sort of represents a sort of challenge that I'm facing, okay? Believe it or not, I am AI lead for my organisation. Believe me, nobody is more surprised than I am that that is the state of play, okay? But I am, because, you know, yeah, give it to the old guy, that'll be fine. He's not going to be around that much longer, he can only screw up so much, that'll be fine, that's great, yeah? So I do that. One of my big challenges, I don't think it is the point that you made about unwarranted distrust, but the sum of that, and then there is what I can only describe as fear. The messages have gone out. How do I address that with my community of L&D practitioners and consultants and the wider organisation so that they actually engage with me on coming up with the ideas that Egle has just referred to, rather than, Robin, what we're doing on AI now, which is the way things happen at the moment. How do I deal with that? You could be my personal coach for the next 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, great question. We haven't rehearsed this, so my answer is not anticipated, and my answer is you counter it with humour and hilarity. I'm sorry, this is not maybe what you expected. I think in seriousness, when I'm in professional settings, the expectation is that you always have to build a business case. Right? You have to show it. You say, well, look, it's not about fear. You're not going to lose your job. It's going to augment your skills. Here is some bar chart that shows these are all the skills that are going to go down and these are all the skills that are going to go up. This is how it normally works. Yet in the news today, there's more layoffs because AI is taking over jobs. It's hard to have that conversation. So as a psychologist, I have a different advice about humor and hilarity. And I think all the things that we're saying here about experimentation and playing with AI is how we counteract the fear. I think it's by experiencing hands-on this technology, this process, but also learning and really being exposed to its weaknesses and strengths is how we get over it. So a practical example for hilarity, if you want to start with laughter. So I use ChatGPT for many reasons, and recently I went out with some moms for a pub quiz. And so we needed a name. What's our name going to be? We're going to be in this quiz. There are 5 moms, So I put it in ChatGPT. Here is 5 moms going out to the quiz, and it gives me lots of mumsy pub quiz team titles. And I know you all want to know what we were called, and it was 1 o'clock wizards. So that is a very, very non-threatening example of using AI. And what happened afterwards, because now ChatGPT knows I'm going to these pub quizzes and I'm a mum, it gives me all this advice. It's like, oh, as a mum, you can do this thing. So I think examples like this is my personal example. I wasn't scared of ChatGPT to begin with, but I think the point I'm trying to make is we need to lean into the human emotions around this technology. We need to create these experiments and pilots that work on a psychological level to counteract the fear. I don't think the business case is going to cut it.
Fair enough.
Robin, can I ask a question?
Please do, Andy, please.
For the two of you, and we value immensely what you're doing professionally, you're doing some brilliant stuff. The challenge I see is that we want to learn collectively, and yet organisations are so risk adverse often about allowing teams to experiment. And I'm sure, maybe any of you just wave if you don't say what company you are, if it's locked down in some degree because of risk. So there's there's
access to Gen AI.
So I want to learn, I want to encourage my team, I want to get them sandboxing, or maybe that's part of the solution. Have you got any advice to me and to us how we can take that curiosity in environments where organisations just don't even want to let you play?
Okay, so two things I want to say here. First, how many of you have heard the term of BYOAI, bring your own AI? Yeah. It's a term about how before it would be bring your own device, now bring your own AI. And this, the problem organizations are having right now with AI is that by not allowing people to use AI, they are pushing them to use their own free, unsafe ChatGPT or whatever generative AI accounts.
They still use it. They still use it.
Yes, and it's becoming a huge problem. So first of all, there are some powers that be that you can get good data to confront them and say that this is what's happening. You know, like that many percent, and we're talking very high percentages of people who are using AI. It's about whether you make it safe or not. It's not a question of using or not. Yeah. But I think it's also important to recognize that we, like any L&D department, can only do as much as its context. L&D cannot run faster than the organization. And one of the when I was thinking about what could explain AI adoption, I came up with this matrix, and if you can imagine, I call it the AI adoption matrix, y-axis being innovative culture versus conservative culture, and x-axis being absent mandate versus active mandate. Yes. There are two big variables that determine how successful you're going to be in adopting AI, which is, first of all, does your organization support it officially? Does it give you the resource? Does it give you the data? Does it give you the training? All that's needed. Mandate, as in we are doing this now. Strategic support. And the other one is culture. You can have the mandate, but you may not have the culture. And if the culture is too conservative, it does not allow experimentation. And what is experimentation? Experimentation means that there is going to be some loss of time. There is going to be time waste. If the organization is not, the culture does not allow that, it's not going to happen. And I think it is the right question to ask, what can we do to encourage that? But it's also important to recognize that there is only so much we can do in some settings. We cannot change, we cannot punch for culture.
Yeah. True.
Very good.
Ksenia.
Just two short pieces of practical advice. I actually really sympathize with that. One, we were talking about it just before the session started, is I find sometimes if the organization already subscribes to a framework like Microsoft, then it's a bit more lenient towards using those solutions
so
because they're co-pilot. Yeah, that's where we started. I started on that. Because it's already part of the framework, it's kind of pre-approved. The other thing, and I don't know, depending on the size of the organization, sometimes the org doesn't want to let the tech in, but it's okay to let consultants in who have the tech. This is not an advert for Accenture. I mean, like a small company. So one company I supported, they want to experiment with data analysis, and they don't want to invest in the infrastructure. They don't have a risk officer for that, but they're okay to pay a small tech company who will do the experiments for them. And then suddenly there is a business case, so they understand how it can be used. So yeah, I know those two won't work for everyone, but those are the two I come across.
Thank you.
Nigel, Egle touched on culture around.
Can I add one tip to that? And then, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. What I always say to people is, as a team, make a case to be the pilot in the organisation. We need to do this, so just let us work on it, and we'll report back on what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't work. And often organisations, because it's contained, because it's safe, because it's transparent, will agree to that, and that is the infiltration. That's the seed that smashes things apart and cracks the concrete, if you like. So there is always a way, unless you're in a completely psycho organisation, which you shouldn't be working for. Yeah. If that is really the case, look for another job, because they're going to go out of business.
So if I could just have a hands up, how many of you are in a completely psycho organisation? Just wanted to check that. Oh, good.
Well, at least one.
So, ladies and gentlemen,
badge of courage to that person.
We have reached time. I'm sorry, I didn't see any hands going up, so I kind of hoped it was okay that we just kept having a chat, which is basically, the trouble is that chat will now continue until I'm on stage again next. So, there it is. This is the way life is for some of us. So, thank you very much, first of all, Nigel Paine, Egle Vinauskaite, Ksenia Zheltoukhova, who has put a bit of a shift in today, and Andy Lancaster, who hasn't.
Who hasn't?